There is a neighborhood in Memphis, Tennessee called Fraser. If you have never heard of it, that is exactly the point. It does not make national news for its schools, or its economy, or its opportunity. It makes the kind of news that nobody wants to be part of. Drugs, violence, poverty that does not announce itself. It just sits there, generation after generation, waiting to become someone's ceiling. Mario Mims grew up there, and instead of a ceiling, he turned it into a foundation. The world knows him as Yo Gotti. And in February 2024, Forbes put his name on a cover story. Not for a new album, not for a comeback tour, but for a $100 million empire that includes one of the most powerful independent record labels in hip-hop history, a minority ownership stake in a professional soccer franchise, and relationships inside NBA ownership circles that most people in his position never get close to. He told Forbes something that very few artists have ever been able to say without lying. If I never wrote another rap again, I'm financially straight. My whole career, I was setting up for that. That sentence is not a flex. It is a mission statement, one that he has been executing since he was 14 years old, rapping in Memphis with no label, no manager, and no guarantee that any of it would ever amount to anything. In 2026, Yo Gotti is 44 years old. The kid from Fraser is still building. This is the truth about how he got there. Fraser, the Feds, and Lil Yo Mario Centel Gaiden Mims was born on May 19, 1981, in Memphis, Tennessee. His father was a gym instructor originally from Zimbabwe. His mother, Geraldine Mims, was of South African descent. They settled in the Ridgecrest Apartments in Fraser, a working-class neighborhood on the north side of Memphis, where the streets had their own economy, their own rules, and very little patience for people who moved slowly. Geraldine was the center of the household. Years later, Yo Gotti's older brother Anthony, known as Big Jook, would describe their mother to Vibe magazine as the neighborhood's version of John Gotti. Not a criminal title, a respect title. The kind of woman who commanded a room, who kept things together when everything around her was falling apart, who understood money and power in ways that the streets taught long before any business school did. But the streets also had a cost. When Mario was in the second grade, federal agents raided the family home. People he loved were arrested. Sentences came down. Years behind bars for members of his own family. He was old enough to understand what had happened. Young enough that it became part of how he saw the world before he had the language to describe it. What it did not do was break him. What it did was teach him, earlier than most children ever have to learn, that there were two versions of the hustle. One had an expiration date. One did not. By the age of 14, Mario had already chosen music. He began performing around Memphis under the name Lil Yo, affiliating with DJ Sound and his crew, building a local reputation the way every rapper from that era had to, show by show, mixtape by mixtape, handshake by handshake. There was no algorithm working in his favor. There was no social media shortcut. There was only the work and whatever audience showed up to hear it. Between 2000 and 2006, he released a string of fully independent albums, from Da Dope Game to Da Rap Game, self-explanatory, life, back to the basics. None of them broke nationally. All of them built something, a catalog, a reputation, a fan base in the South that was loyal precisely because it recognized something real in what he was saying. He was not performing struggle. He was reporting it. Those years also shaped something in him that would matter more than any single hit record. Geraldine Mims, watching her son grind without a safety net, had given him an education in financial discipline before he ever had real money to discipline. She had shown him what happened when cash came fast and left faster. She had shown him what it looked like when someone confused having money with building wealth. He was paying attention. By the time the major label calls started coming, Gotti already knew what he wanted, and, more importantly, what he was not willing to give up to get it. Live from the kitchen. The major label years. In 2009, Gotti signed with J Records. It was the moment that most independent artists spend a decade chasing. Validation from the major label system, distribution muscle, marketing budgets, and the kind of radio access that regional grind alone could never guarantee. For a kid from Fraser who had been self-releasing albums since he was 19, it should have felt like a rival. It felt like a lesson instead. His major label debut, Live from the Kitchen, finally dropped in January 2012 after years of delays. The lead single, 5 Star, had actually been released back in 2009 and peaked at number 79 on the Hot 100. Women Lie, Men Lie, featuring Lil Wayne, followed and earned a gold certification. The album itself debuted at number 12 on the Billboard 200, a legitimate chart performance by any measure. But the label and the artist were not on the same page about what success looked like, and Gotti was not the kind of man who stayed in rooms where his vision was being diluted. He left. What happened next is the decision that separates Gotti's story from the standard rapper narrative. Rather than chase another major deal, he doubled down on independence. In 2012, he founded his own record label, originally called Cocaine Music Group, later rebranded on the advice of 50 Cent to Collective Music Group, CMG. The name change was strategic. 50 Cent told him directly that the old name would scare off corporate partners before the conversation even started. Gotti listened. He signed to Epic Records for distribution, keeping creative and business control while gaining the infrastructure he needed to compete at scale. It was the Jay-Z model applied to Memphis rap. Own the label, control the roster, build the brand from the inside out. The music during this period matched the momentum. I Am dropped in November 2013 and earned him a BET Hip Hop Awards nomination for Album of the Year. The Art of Hustle followed in 2016, peaking at number 4 on the Billboard 200. Then came the song that introduced him to an entirely new audience, Down in the DM, featuring Nicki Minaj, which peaked at number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the most recognizable hooks of that year. A follow-up collaboration with Minaj, Rake It Up, peaked at number 8, his highest charting single to date. But the bigger story was happening off the charts. While his peers were spending on jewelry and cars and the performance of wealth, Gotti was studying ownership. He had enrolled in courses at UCLA's Anderson School of Management, specifically corporate valuation, quietly building the analytical vocabulary to match the instincts he had been developing his entire life. Jay-Z, who had become a mentor, told Forbes what he saw in him. Someone who was breaking the old guard definition of what a music executive was supposed to look like. Gotti was not trying to look like anything. He was building something real. CMG, the label that changed Memphis. There is a specific kind of credibility that money cannot buy and marketing cannot manufacture. It is the credibility that comes from being from somewhere real, signing artists from that same somewhere, and building a label that sounds like the streets it came from rather than a corporate approximation of them. That is what Collective Music Group became. When Gotti founded CMG, the blueprint was not complicated. Find artists with genuine talent and genuine hunger. Give them the infrastructure they could not access on their own. protect their creative voice. Build long-term, not for a single album cycle, not for a quick flip, but for the kind of career trajectory that compounds over time the way a good investment does. The results speak in numbers that are difficult to argue with. Moneybagg Yo became one of the most consistent album performers in modern hip-hop, landing multiple #1 debuts on the Billboard 200. Glorilla emerged as one of the most talked-about new voices in rap, earning Grammy nominations and mainstream crossover attention at a speed that most artists spend a decade trying to achieve. Black Youngsta, 42 Doug, ESTG, Mozzie. The CMG roster reads less like a label and more like a movement, a regional identity that punched through to national relevance without softening its edges to get there. Gotti told Forbes that 50 Cent deserves partial credit for the label's evolution, not just the name change, but the mindset shift that came with it. Thinking more corporate, thinking about longevity, thinking about what the label looks like from the outside to partners, investors, and the industry infrastructure that controls distribution and playlist placement. That shift mattered. CMG is not just a rap label in 2026. It is a business entity with real valuation, real leverage, and a roster whose combined streaming numbers and touring revenue represent a financial footprint that extends well beyond what any single artist on the roster could generate alone. Analysts who have examined Gotti's overall empire estimate that CMG contributes the single largest portion of his $100 million net worth. More than his music catalog, more than his real estate, more than his sports ownership stake. What makes it more significant is the context. CMG is independent in the way that actually matters, not independent as a branding strategy, but independent as a structural reality. Gotti controls the decisions, he controls the revenue splits, he controls what the label becomes next. There is no corporate parent waiting to override his vision when quarterly earnings disappoint. Jay-Z saw it clearly. When Forbes asked him about Gotti's business trajectory, he did not talk about hit records. He talked about executive instinct, about a man who had figured out that the music was the entry point, not the destination. For Yo Gotti, CMG was never just a record label. It was the proof of concept, the demonstration that a kid from Fraser could build an institution, not just a career. Memphis had given him the hunger. CMG was what he did with it. Beyond the mic, real estate, DC United, and the NBA world. There is a moment in every serious entrepreneur's life when the question shifts. It stops being, how do I make more money? And starts being, where do I put it so it works while I sleep? For Yo Gotti, that shift did not happen overnight. It happened the way everything in his life happened. Gradually, deliberately, and with more strategic patience than most people in his position ever managed to maintain. Real estate came first. Gotti has spoken publicly about flipping properties as one of his earliest off-music income streams, buying distressed assets, renovating them, and reselling at profit. It is the unglamorous version of wealth building that rarely makes it into rap lyrics, but consistently makes it into the portfolios of people who actually stay rich. In June 2021, he acquired a private estate in Westlake Village, California, a 10,000-square-foot property on 3 acres, featuring 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a tennis court, and an infinity pool with panoramic views of a neighboring golf course. The purchase price was $7.6 million. By September 2022, he listed it for $8.6 million. Not a life-changing margin on paper, but a demonstration of the discipline: buy right, improve, move on. Never fall in love with an asset more than its numbers justify. The bigger move came in September 2021, and it came through a relationship. Yo Gotti had developed a genuine friendship over several years with Jason Levian and Steve Kaplan, the co-chairman of DC United, the Major League Soccer franchise based in Washington. That friendship had been built in part through their shared connection to Memphis. Levian and Kaplan are also investors in the Memphis Grizzlies, the NBA franchise that sits at the geographic and emotional center of the city Gotti has always claimed as home. Basketball was the bridge. Business was what crossed it. In 2021, Gotti joined a group of investors, including petroleum executive Eob Joe Mamo, to acquire a minority stake in DC United, a club valued at the time at approximately $750 million. The investor group was projected to acquire roughly 6% of the franchise. He told The Athletic that his background made the investment feel like something beyond a financial transaction. "I think coming from where I come from as a kid, to be considered the inner-city hoods, and to be able to go into entrepreneurship and even have the opportunity to be involved in such a big thing, it's almost like a dream come true." That quote matters, because it is not the language of someone who bought a sports team to put it on Instagram. It is the language of someone who understood exactly how far the distance was between Ridgecrest Apartments and a seat at a professional sports ownership table, and felt every mile of it. The NBA connection runs parallel. Gotti is a well-known presence in NBA circles, a passionate basketball fan with genuine relationships inside ownership at the Grizzlies level, the team that represents his city. Those relationships are not ownership stakes on paper, but in the world of sports business, proximity to power and capital has a value that does not always show up on a balance sheet. What all of it, the real estate, the soccer franchise, the NBA relationships, reflects is a man who learned the difference between earning and building. One stops when you stop. The other does not. The $100 million breakdown. Where the money actually lives. When Forbes valued Yo Gotti's empire at $100 million in early 2024, the number landed with the kind of weight that demands context. Because $100 million means very different things depending on how it was built. A rapper who spent 20 years chasing hit records and endorsement checks and arrived at that number through pure music industry math is a different story from an entrepreneur who used music as the launchpad for a diversified portfolio that would survive even if the music stopped tomorrow. Yo Gotti is the second version of that story. The breakdown, as best as analysts and reporting have been able to construct it, looks something like this. CMG, Collective Music Group, carries the heaviest weight. As the founder and chief executive officer of an independent label with a roster generating hundreds of millions of streams annually, Gotti's ownership position in the label represents the largest single asset in his portfolio. The label's value is not just its current revenue. It is its catalog, its artist contracts, its infrastructure, and its positioning as one of the few truly independent hip-hop operations with genuine major label reach. That asset does not depreciate. It compounds. His personal music catalog, 11 studio albums, dozens of mixtapes, gold and platinum certifications accumulated over more than 2 decades, represents a second revenue stream that continues generating royalties long after the albums stopped being promotional priorities. In the streaming era, catalog is currency. Gotti has a lot of it. Real estate holdings built through years of disciplined property acquisition and renovation contribute a stable base of hard assets to a portfolio that could otherwise be vulnerable to the volatility of the entertainment industry. The Westlake Village transaction alone demonstrated the approach. Buy with intention, improve with purpose, sell with patience. The DC United stake, acquired as part of a group purchase of a franchise valued at $750 million, represents the most visible non-music asset in the portfolio. Major League Soccer franchise valuations have risen consistently over the past decade as the league has expanded, attracted international investment, and grown its media rights footprint. A 6% stake in a $750 million club is not a vanity purchase. It is a long-term appreciating asset in a market that has shown no signs of contracting. And then there is the restaurant, Privé, in Memphis. His mother runs it. It is not the financial engine of the empire, but it is the one business that connects everything back to where it started. Family, community, the city that made him. Taken together, the $100 million is not a number that happened to Gotti. It is a number he architected, one income stream at a time, over 30 years, starting with a microphone in Fraser and ending with a Forbes cover and a seat at tables that most people from his zip code never get invited to approach. The Fraser blueprint. In that Forbes interview, Gotti said something that most people glossed over in favor of the $100 million headline. He said, "A lot of people don't have patience. They want it all tomorrow, so they can't execute a real plan." That sentence is the whole biography, not the hit records, not the DC United stake, not the CMG roster or the real estate portfolio or the UCLA business courses or the Jay-Z mentorship. All of those things are real and all of them matter. But underneath every single one of them is the same quality: the willingness to move slowly in an industry that rewards spectacle, to think in decades in a culture that celebrates the moment, to build something that lasts in a world that is almost entirely organized around what is happening right now. Geraldine Mims taught him that before he ever had a dollar to protect. She showed him what fast money looked like when it left. She showed him what it cost a person, not just financially, but in dignity, in stability, in the ability to look at your own life and recognize something durable in it. He watched, he remembered, and when the money finally came, he treated it the way she had taught him to treat everything that mattered. With discipline, with patience, with a plan that extended past the next album cycle. In 2026, Gotti is 44 years old. He is still releasing music, still running CMG, still building. The kid from Ridgecrest Apartments, who watched federal agents walk through his front door, now sits in ownership meetings for a professional sports franchise and mentors the next generation of artists through a label that carries the DNA of everything Memphis ever taught him about surviving and converting that survival into something permanent. Jay-Z told Forbes that Gotti is redefining what it means to be an executive. That is true. But the more accurate framing might be simpler than that. He is redefining what it means to be from Fraser, not as a place you escape, as a place that built you, as a foundation so solid that everything you stack on top of it, the label, the franchise stake, the $100 million, the Forbes cover, holds. The blueprint was always Memphis. Gotti just showed everyone what you could build with it. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Drop a comment below. Do you think Gotti is the most underrated businessman in hip-hop? We will see you in the next one.